Story 1. Many countries should follow suit. Corruption is rampant in many places, and many politicians and nepotism beneficiaries need to be afraid of the people again. To be clear, I do not mean they should fear violence. They should fear being caught stealing and facing the consequences. I also want to acknowledge Indonesia. Nepal is in the news now, but Indonesia had massive youth-led protests earlier. Note, I understand the points people are making regarding violence. I just wanted to make it clear that I was not advocating violence because I have received a bullshit administrator warning for advocating violence in the past, even though I was joking. Story 2. I hope they get a better government. Sometimes these revolutions do not end so well. Story 3. Looking at soaring prices, inflation, ghost job markets, and corrupt politicians around the world, I believe more people should stand up. Our potential wealth and opportunities are being stolen by the 1% in government. Society must not fall into another depression. Story 4. They did a great job overall compared to most revolutions. They are already cleaning up and have chosen a good interim leader. She is a retired Supreme Court justice, well known for fighting corruption while on the court. Story 5. The Discord group to nominate an interim leader is funny. I love the modern age. Story 6. Nepal has a very complicated political situation, and I will not jump to conclusions now. That said, if the movement is not co-opted, I am always in favor of the people deciding their own future without interference from outside. Story 7. As an Indonesian, I am glad that we inspired them to take action and succeeded where we failed. Story 8. I am surprised it has not happened elsewhere in the world, given our rights being stripped away by measures such as the Online Safety Act, European Chat Control, events in the United States of America, and so on. Story 9. If it happened in the United Kingdom, even if the current government were removed, there would be no one decent to lead. No politician appears wise or competent, and the average citizen is unlikely to be suited to leadership. Story 10. Can you come here and do it for us as well? We seem to have trouble doing it ourselves. Story 11. I will watch and see how it shakes out now. It is one thing to oust a corrupt government. It is another to form a fair, stable, and united government from the ashes afterward. Story 12. I believe this should be taken as a warning to every government. It is not a call to enforce more authoritarian control and division, but a demand to finally listen and to rein in greed and corruption before everything is burned to the ground. It does not matter how many wars you start, or how many fingers you point. People have had enough of lies, manipulation, and division. Tax the wealthy. Hold wealthy predators accountable. People want justice, peace, and prosperity. The only people keeping that from them are politicians, greedy corporations, and chief executive officers. Story 13. I am in favor of removing corrupt governments. If a government is unwanted by the people and an uprising is the only way to do this, then so be it. Story 14. Politicians exist to serve the public, not to enrich themselves at our expense. It is time they remember who gave them power. Generation Z protests are waking people up. Every corrupt system needs that pressure. Story 15. Good. However, based on history, they will probably be about as corrupt as the previous ones, if not more. Story 16. I am loving it. It is very inspiring to see young people stand up against tyranny. It is sad when people die, and I hate violence. I think it is awful that the wife of the Prime Minister was trapped in her burning building. From what I understand of the situation, this uprising was necessary, if not inevitable. It is impressive that it was led by such young people. Holding an election on Discord successfully demonstrates serious organizing. Story 17. I appreciate the sentiment, but we need to wait and see whether the new government will actually be better than the last. Story 18. It is always good to see people fight for a better world and even better to see them win. Certain countries need to see this so they remember it can be done. Story 19. I am ashamed to watch the same thing happen in my country, and I am too tired, boss, to do anything about it. Story 20. I think that is good. It means people are not yet so dumbed down that they won't fight for their rights. I'm very happy that people are fighting the system so hard. Good for them. Story 21. Nepal, India, Turkey, Greece, France, and the United States are protesting, along with many other countries. Story 22. There should be more movements like this, not only in Nepal but everywhere in the world. Young people really have a voice and should be listened to. Story 23. A demonstration of why those in power tend to spend exorbitant amounts of money to prevent social cohesion. Story 24. These leaders need a reminder that the people hold the power. Kudos to the youth of Nepal. Story 25. It is not only Generation Z. Calling it that is misleading. A government that allows children to be shot in the head in the middle of the street has no right to continue governing. Story 26. For context, they did it because the Nepalese government had the bright idea of banning nearly all major social media platforms. This was the final straw on what was already a growing amount of grief toward the establishment. To top it off, the authorities answered the protests with violence. They were on the verge of sparking a revolution. I am glad they were able to bring down such a corrupt, hypocritical, and oppressive government. But I wonder whether what comes next will be an improvement, the same crap, or something worse. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Story 27. I do not understand the question. The government is ordering the army to shoot peacefully protesting schoolchildren with live rounds, with the explicit aim of killing them. What do you mean by, how do you feel about that? Genuine question. What kind of answer are you expecting? Original poster. Story 28. I thought it was encouraging when India had to tuck its tail and retreat after WhatsApp refused to bow to its censorious demands. If that was encouraging, this is absolutely fucking inspiring. Hopefully other governments take note. Story 29. Only time will tell. This could either instill fear of death in corrupt officials or bring a regime better at dividing and misdirecting the masses to prevent a similar event in the future. The country could enter a golden age, an era of instability, or a period of military rule that fights ceaselessly against rebels. No matter what, the next decade will not be easy. Story 30. I think Americans should do the same and overthrow the dictatorship of Donald Trump. But we know that is impossible because of Palantir. Story 31. I love it. I cannot put into words how happy I am to see people succeed in reclaiming their government from corrupt officials. It gives me hope for the future, and I wish for it to spread worldwide. Story 32. It should be done in my country. Our government sold us out to foreign interests long ago, resulting in rampant youth unemployment, a huge wealth and class divide, and a cost of living crisis crushing those beneath the rich. Story 33. I understand why many people admire the courage of young people in Nepal. But we must be realistic. History shows that uprisings almost never end as people hope. At first it feels powerful, the energy, the adrenaline, the belief that you are fighting for justice. But after the euphoria comes chaos. Infighting, exploitation by opportunists, harsher crackdowns, and loss of stability. Nepal has already endured years of political turmoil and social suffering because of movements like these. What people often forget is that the harder you push in the streets, the more governments lock down and restrict freedoms. Those restrictions do not go away. They settle in quietly until one day you wake up with fewer rights. Real strength is not burning the garden to make it grow back faster. It is protecting peace using channels of dialogue and gradual change, even if they feel slow. Violence and instability destroy more than they create. Disorder promises freedom, but what it really takes away is security. Without security, no freedom lasts. What is more important for lasting freedom? Security or revolution? Story 34. I am curious how they verified that only people from Nepal were able to vote in that Discord poll and that each person voted only once. Story 35. It was hugely risky, but I do not know the situation in Nepal. I have to trust that the people knew the risks would be worth it. The army very easily could have seized power if the leaders had wanted to. Story 36. Generation Z in Nepal shows that fear shifts quickly when young people stop playing nice. Story 37. That the protest targeted only government-related buildings and did not involve burning or looting shops is worthy of praise. Story 38. I do not necessarily trust Generation Z's assessment of things, but if it is truly a highly corrupt government, I fully support the protest provided the protesters do not take actions that could backfire and make them appear to be villains, such as destroying public infrastructure and so on. Story 39. I usually avoid politics, so I do not know the specifics, but were they shot down or stopped by the police, military, or government agencies? If we tried something like this in Hungary, I feel they would first use water cannons and then probably live ammunition until the protesters scattered. I wish this would happen in many countries, including ours. We all deserve better. Story 40. Good for them. Peaceful protest resolves absolutely nothing. Politicians never learn, and perhaps if they feared the population they might start to behave. I wish my country could do that. A few years ago we had a peaceful protest, and now we are back where we started. Violence and replacement will not guarantee a better regime, but if the process is repeated, perhaps they will eventually understand. Story 41. As an Indonesian whose country's protests inspired this one, I am proud that young people from my country actually did something that left a global impact for once. However, I am disappointed with the protest movement here because it fizzled out and our government is becoming more authoritarian and corrupt by the day. Story 42. Nepal has always been very hard to understand. The Maoist movement is not typical of what one would see elsewhere. There appears to be an elite that takes great advantage of others, and it seems they regularly receive brutal retribution. The key question is whether that revolution will trigger any change in the very poor rural country. I wish it would, but I have my doubts. Story 43. If it is corrupted, it must go. I am not sure why Generation Z is the only one concerned. Story 44. This is another example of why communism is corrupt and cannot last. Story 45. Global and nearby reactions. People abroad, especially in South Asia and among diaspora communities, are generally supportive. Many see this as young people standing up to entrenched corruption. They call it brave, given the risk to life or liberty. Some are hopeful. They view this as a chance for systemic change, including better governance, greater transparency, and more meritocracy instead of a system built on connections. Others are wary or cautious. They warn that protests alone do not always produce good outcomes. Risks include violence and chaos, new leaders proving as bad or worse, and political instability hurting ordinary people most. Story 46. Love it. This is the only way to change the system. We all know voting does not work. Story 47. The protesters have succeeded in removing some problematic established power structures in Nepal. They now face a much tougher challenge deciding on the next steps. Nepal's economy is in a difficult position. It is heavily dependent on remittances from Nepali workers who live abroad, which account for 9.1% of Nepal's gross domestic product. Its largest industry is agriculture, but only about 20% of the land is cultivable. Nepal's trade balance is weak. A major potential resource over the next 50 years is hydropower for export, along with industries that are capital-intensive to establish. From an international relations perspective, Nepal is in a difficult position, situated between India and China. Its relationship with India is relatively good, but if relations deteriorate between India and China, Nepal would be vulnerable. I wish them well. They have a huge task ahead. Story 48. I believe this may be the beginning of a societal jihad against corruption. Unless the government is willing to reform itself, the movement is inevitable. Story 49. I am relieved because communist leaders are among the worst leaders for a poor country. Despite being between two major powers and having a relatively large tourism sector, Nepal has only half the gross domestic product per capita of India or Bangladesh. The only reason it reaches that level is remittances from many Nepalis working abroad and sending money home. You hear about foreign workers being forced to live in poor conditions and sometimes dying while constructing buildings in Qatar and Dubai. Many of them are Nepali because of the lack of work at home. I hope this opens Nepal to economic freedom. Nepal is a young country that seems technically savvy, which could be a recipe for growth under a better government. I hope the next government is better. Story 50. As a Filipino, I see a glimmer of hope. The Philippines also has widespread corruption issues. The most recent to be unraveled involves flood control. My fellow Generation Z Filipinos carried out student protests as recently as yesterday, especially at state universities like the University of the Philippines. But several factors deter us from coalescing. Philippine politics is divided into four main factions, with short explainers for non-Filipinos. Supporters of incumbent President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and his family, center-right to far-right, staunchly pro-United States, especially because the elder Marcos was United States-backed. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. also has his sister Mia as senator, his son Sandro as representative of their district, and his cousin Ferdinand Martin Romualdez as Speaker of the lower congressional chamber. Their battle cry revolves around manufactured nostalgia for the supposed golden age of the elder Marcos's kleptocratic dictatorship, 1972 to 1986. Despite the family's reputation, the Marcoses regained some support due to the poor record of his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte. Supporters of former President Rodrigo Duterte, commonly known as the die-hard Duterte supporters, far-right anti-communists who are ironically also pro-China. Rodrigo Duterte is described by some as a Zionist. Typically composed of people from the southern Philippine regions, they are this former United States colony's version of Make America Great Again movement. Supporters. The die-hard Duterte supporters rally around Duterte's daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, a potential frontrunner in the 2028 presidential polls, an advocate for terminating Rodrigo Duterte's International Criminal Court trial. They also include religious sects ranging from the mainstream Iglesia Ni Cristo to the pedophilic Kingdom of Jesus Christ. Supporters of former Vice President Leni Robredo, commonly known as Kakampinks. Kakampink is a portmanteau of Kakampi, literally ally, and pink, hence pink allies. A broad coalition ranging from center-left to near-right, also staunchly pro-United States and can be either pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. The closest United States counterpart is the Democratic Party. They stem from the grassroots movement born during Robredo's failed 2022 presidential bid and actively fight disinformation from the two camps above, sometimes overzealously. Leni Robredo, the widow of former Interior Secretary Jesse Robredo, now serves as mayor of their hometown, Naga City, and is seen as an example of good governance. The Maccabean bloc, literally nationalist, far-left progressives preaching anti-imperialist viewpoints, includes the student activists mentioned earlier. The bloc opposes China, Israel, and the United States while explicitly supporting the Palestinian struggle and also includes tankies, commonly targeted by the die-hard Duterte supporters for their political leanings and by the Kakampinks for being too radical. The Maccabean bloc has struggled during elections. Red tagging is the practice of labeling people as communists, terrorists, or both. It is also known as red baiting outside the Philippines. The practice existed prior to Duterte's strongman rule. Fears of a communist takeover in the 1970s helped push the elder Marcos to declare martial law and rule as a dictator, but it was propelled into the mainstream. When Rodrigo Duterte took power, red tagging has suppressed dissent and led to deaths and enforced disappearances of activists affiliated with the Maccabean bloc, contributing to the steady loss of congressional seats for the far-left coalition, often at the hands of state forces. This McCarthyist practice has persisted during Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s rule. Regionalism is still related to the factions above. People from the Central Visayas and Mindanao lean toward the Dutertes. Northern Luzon and Eastern Visayas lean toward the Marcoses. Southeast Luzon and Western Visayas lean toward Robredo. Meanwhile, the decimated and heavily demonized left, the Maccabean bloc, does not have a regional stronghold. Story 51. I'm fine with it. I don't live there or know what it's like. I don't agree with Discord voting, however. Story 52. I think we will know what happens after a while. We cannot be too happy about a revolution. It might lead to regression as well. It is good that people are tired of corruption enough to take action. About 20 people are dead, and I do not know which side they were on. Let us hope it leads to a better future for Nepal. Story 53. Governments should serve the people, not the other way around. If the balance is incorrect, as it too often is, people may have to fight for their rights. Story 54. The Nepalese government lost its legitimacy, when it perpetrated violent criminal activities against Nepal. Story 55. Exceptionally based. Can you in America do it? If you defend your amendment and your rights, can you use the Second Amendment? Story 56. It is really cool that they are fighting, not just talking. Story 57. Consequences of a corrupt government. In the United States, on the other hand. Story 58. Honestly, it is inspiring to see young people demanding accountability. Corruption often survives because people feel powerless, but movements like this show that energy and unity can push back. Generation Z has grown up in a digital age where organizing is faster and information spreads quicker than ever. Even if it does not change everything overnight, it plants seeds of resistance and hope. Watching from afar makes me think more youth-led movements could be the key to future reforms worldwide. Story 59. Protests often do not accomplish much. If there were an embattled political institution that the protesters were fighting for, that would be different. As I see it, nothing is going to come of all this smoke and fire. Story 60. On one hand, it may seem tempting to many who believe it can improve their situation. On the other hand, this country is sandwiched between two powerful neighbors, and any loss of authority can lead to a loss of sovereignty in ways that are not always obvious. In this wave of events, there is a real chance of deeper foreign intervention, and students, however well-meaning, are not experienced state managers. I am Ukrainian and was present at similar events in 2013. I know what it means to lack the strength to resist absurdity. Story 61. If it is as sudden and chaotic as it appears, it will likely be short-lived. Spur-of-the-moment revolutions that create immediate change also create power vacuums into which people with fewer scruples and more influence usually step. There is nothing particularly special about Generation Z in a historical sense. We often assume movements led by young people will be more progressive and less corrupt, but this is not supported by evidence. Many movements led by young people have, after overthrowing incumbents, caused social and economic regression. It is almost always because a more experienced and wily person takes control of the resulting power vacuum. Afghanistan, for example, was never a shining beacon, but it had a somewhat stable government in the 1990s. That government was overthrown by a movement of students and clerics, the Taliban, who took a divided, impoverished, and corrupt country and made it worse. Story 62. As a Malaysian, I wonder whether they were inspired by a neighbor, Indonesia. Story 63. I love how Reddit constantly shows me news about Generation Z protests. Even posts with 48 upvotes and 37 comments that would never have appeared in my feed before. Surely not China trying. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.